Hello, I'm Richard Offinger, developer of the Lakedata software program. In this tutorial video, I will be showing new users how to get off to a quick start, as well as showing tips that will help all users to get the most out of the program. Assuming that you've already downloaded and installed the software using the appropriate installation files, which are available at the Lakedata Downloads website, the Lakedata program will automatically start and display the window which you are now viewing. If the window reads, "Welcome to Lakedata 2014 version 8.8 for Windows," then this confirms that your installation was indeed successful, and if so, then you should now choose your correct agency code. Unless you are entering records for the Lakes Environmental Association, LEA, or for Scott Williams, you should click your mouse to bullet the first choice shown on the agency code selector, which is EI03. After doing so, you will then see the Lakedata data entry window. As with any other windows, you can point your mouse at the title bar area at the top of the window. That would be this area. You can see that the title reads Lakedata 2014 version 8.8. Now if you point at that area of the title bar, you can then hold down your left mouse button and drag the window anywhere you want on the screen, on your monitor screen. Down, up, left, or right. Drag it anywhere and then drop the window at that location by letting off the left mouse button. You can see that I can then move the mouse without moving the window. Now the positioning information for the window is stored in the Lakedata program when you exit the Lakedata program. And so it's available again when you start up the program. Each subsequent start will have the window placed at this position automatically. And it'll remain there unless you change the position of the window by dragging it to a different location on your monitor screen during a new session. Now notice that the data entry window has 4 data entry grids and that each one is titled at its right side. The upper data entry grid is the General Records grid. Over here we have the Sucky Records grid. Over here, Dissolved Oxygen Records. And down below that, the Chemical Records grid. Now, in between the Sucky Records grid and the Dissolved Oxygen Records grid, we have the Records Navigator. And I'll be talking about that a little later on. Right now, there aren't that many options available in the Records Navigator. Now, data entry always begins by entering a general record followed by a corresponding Sucky record. All alphabetical characters in a record are to be entered as capitalized letters, so the Lakedata program automatically starts up with the caps lock key turned on. Note that the first column of the General Records grid, right here, is highlighted in blue, and that the record position indicator, down here, below the General Records grid, shows that we are currently at record position 1. If you look just above the Records Navigator, you see a yellow area which tells us that the active grid currently is the General Records grid. So this confirms that we're ready to begin data entry of a General Record and a Sucky record. I'll be using some of the information for the lake which I monitor for this example. And I'll begin entering the record for the lake which I monitor. Cat Ants Lake in Cooper, Maine. Now, after the first 4 letters of the lake are entered, we press the Tab key to go to the next column. And this is true after each column of data is entered. You always press the Tab key afterwards, which moves us to the next column, and so on. Now the Midas number, station, and for surveyor I'll use my own name. Last name goes first, followed by a comma, space, and then my first name, Richard. I move on to the next surveyor column. I'm not going to enter any data there, and normally we don't enter any other data there. However, there may be occasions when we have 2 monitors, and even if only one takes a reading, both monitors should be listed. So I'll move on to the month. I'll use today's date, 8th month, 5th day of 2014. And the time, I'll use the current time, 12:07. Just shortly afternoon. Now the wind velocity, I'll use something fictional for that. Let's say that it's 7 miles per hour. And wind direction also requires a numerical value which corresponds on the data sheet to a specific direction of wind. It might be southwest, north, or whatever. I'm going to enter 5 at this time. The sky, today's a bright day, and so I'll use B for bright. Now watch what happens after entering this data by hitting the Tab key. I'll be automatically taken to the Sucky Records grid for to begin data entry there. Now you'll see a message pops up just below the data entry grid saying press F9 if you only have QA-cert data. That rarely actually happens. The reason for this is because a Sucky record must be input for every general record that is made. And even if it only has QA-cert data, it must have QA-cert data in order to be a legitimate general record. So I'm going to enter the numerical data here for a Sucky reading, and this I'm going to enter this as 8.56 meters, and you can see that the scope type and the next field, hits bottom, is already entered as a default value. I can accept the default value of the scope simply by pressing the Tab key, and the same goes for the hits bottom field. I can accept that value, or I can change the value by typing in a yes if the Sucky disk did hit the bottom. Now for QA-cert number, you would enter that from the record sheet. I'm going to enter my QA-cert number here. You don't need to enter the hyphen in between the letters and the numerical number. That's entered automatically by the Lakedata program. All you need to do is type the 2 letters followed by the 4 numbers, and then press the Tab key. The reading number, this is record number 1 for the Sucky Records. So I type in 1, then I press the tab key again, and you can see that I'm ready to begin entering a second reading if a second reading is shown on the data entry sheet. Now, for purposes of this video, let's assume that there is a second reading that was taken and recorded on the data sheet. Let's enter that now. I'll put in 8.65. Tab. Now I could tab all the way across to the reading number. The other values are already there for me, carried forward to enable faster data entry. But instead of tabbing across, a quicker way to get to the reading number would be to press the End key on your keyboard, like so. Now I'm ready to put in reading number 2. Tab, and there we go. Now at this time, let's assume that we also have data to be input for dissolved oxygen records. The best way to do this is to click into the first column at the dissolved oxygen records grid. So that's what I'll do. And I'll begin with the first dissolved oxygen record. And normally that's at a 0 depth, or a surface reading actually. Now you can see that several options pop up here. These are default values that I can accept by pressing the tab key, or I could change that by typing in a new value and then pressing the tab key. But I'll accept this value, the default value. Move on to the temperature field. I'll enter a value there. I'll accept the value shown here as the default value of Celsius, centigrade. I go to the oxygen field and I can type in another value here. I'll accept the method value of M, which means this was taken by a meter. And I'll also accept this value of Y, which means that the meter was in fact calibrated. Now this takes me down to the second dissolved oxygen reading, and at this time I'll bring your attention to the area just below the dissolved oxygen records grid, and you can see it says DO data entry speed switch is off. I'm going to turn that on, and you'll notice that in the function key options area, the bottom left corner of the window, F11 equals set DO speed entry on. So what I'll do is press the F11 function key, and you will see that the message just below the dissolved oxygen records grid changes to DO entry speed switch on. I can toggle that a few more times, and each time I hit the F11 key, it will alternate between off and on, off, on. Okay, so now it's on. And this enables me to enter subsequent dissolved oxygen records much more quickly. I'll show you. I go from 1 meter, and it skips over the meter field and goes directly to the water temperature field. And again, we skip over the C or F field and go right to oxygen. and then we skip right over the others and jump right to the next reading. And so on. Now I'd like to point out at this time that if you should see any incorrect values within the dissolved oxygen records, in order to change a value, edit it, in other words, you must turn off the DO entry speed switch first. And that will enable you to do edits of any incorrect values. At this time, you could move over to the chemical records grid by clicking into the first column of that grid. However, let's assume that we don't have any chemical records to be entered, and we want to begin entering the second record for the general records grid. In order to do that, you should click F6, function key F6, to begin a new general record. And you can see that the first 4 columns of the general record have already been entered for you, which saves a little bit of data entry time, and you're ready to begin with the month. Now, at this time, I'm going to pause my video, and I'm going to enter several additional records, and then I'll talk about how to edit records and browse records. Okay, I'm back, and as you can see, I now have 5 general records entered. We're at record position number 5. And the active grid is the chemical data grid. And that's because I have entered a chemical record, 1 chemical record. There's also 1 Sucky record and 2 dissolved oxygen records. Now you'll notice down in the chemical records grid that there are a lot of 9s showing. That's because every field in a data grid has to have an entry. And the only actual entries here that have data would be these first, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The first 5, and this tells us that if this was an actual case, this would be that the monitor took a surface grab, 0 depth at the surface, 0 meters, and he took a grab sample of water to measure the pH of the water. Okay. Now, at this time, we're going to click the F6 function key button in order to begin a new general record. And you see we're ready to begin entering data. However, let's just assume that we're all done entering data for this particular lake, Midas, and station. If it was just a station change, we could go over here and click this column and enter a station 2 or 3 or whatever the station is, and then continue on with entering data. However, if we want to enter data for a new lake, then the thing to do is press function key F2, which is a change Midas function. So I'll do that now, F2. And you see that takes us right back to the first column. We're ready to begin entering data for a new lake. All right. And let's call that huge lake, for example. Okay, but let's say right now that we started to do that, and then we realize that there's something wrong with the data on the data sheet, and it's not going to be a good record for us to enter because we don't have sufficient data on the sheet to complete the record. Well, that's not going to be a huge problem. we go down here to the Records Navigator, and the last button on the right is a cancel button. That means we can cancel entering that record. I click that, see, and we go back to record position 5. We were at position number 6. We're going to go back to 5. All right, that's a simple solution to that problem. Now let's take a look at the methods for browsing and editing records. In order to browse records, press function key F5. This takes us up to the first record in the general records grid. And from there we can browse down either by pressing the cursor keys on your keyboard. Those are the arrow keys, in which case we'd now press the down arrow and press it again to go to the next record, press the up arrow to go back up, or press the button on the Records Navigator, the third button from the left, which is the next record button. The button just to the left of that is the previous record button. And over here we have the last record button. If I press that, that takes me to record number 5, you see, or I can go back to record number 1, pressing the first button on the navigator. Now let's say that we see something while we're browsing that looks like we have some wrong information in here in one of the records. Let's assume that perhaps it's the time element for record number 3. Currently we have 1312 as the time, but looking at a data sheet, suppose that the actual data for that record should have been 1308. Well, come down to the Records Navigator and press this button. It's the Edit Record button. And you can see that at the left margin of the General Records grid, we have a different character here now. This is the editing character. Normally we have an arrow like we do down here on the Sucky grid, but now we're in edit mode. So enter the time, 1308, for the correction, and then go back to the Records Navigator and click this button, which is the Post Edit button, and you've just successfully posted that change to the record. You can see that the black arrow is back again at the left margin of the data entry grid. So that's all taken care of, and this would be the method you would use to edit data in any one of the record grids. Same way. You have to, if you're editing data in the dissolved oxygen grid, for example, you would have to be working inside the dissolved oxygen grid. It would have to be the active grid. Now let's see if we can find a dissolved oxygen record. Oh, there we go. Record position 4 of the general records shows us some dissolved oxygen records. So that would be the same method we would use there. If we saw something wrong here, we'd click that. And we go down to Edit Record, make our change, and then we'd post the record again. Okay. Now, let's say that we want to browse the dissolved oxygen records. We go up to the, we have to have the active grid, DO data, in order to do that. Let's go to the first record, which is depth of 0. We go to the last record, which is a 10-meter depth. You see? So this is true of navigating through any of the data entry grids. You simply have to click into the grid to make it the active grid, and then you can use the Records Navigator to navigate through there, and you can use the Records Navigator to edit and post edits. All right. Now I want to show you something else now. It's the help function, and you should use the help function as often as you need to. There's a lot you can learn by reading there. And to go into the help mode, we'd press function key F1. And you see there we have a help menu up here. Don't click into this area. If you do, you'll need to click into one of the data entry grids in order to get out of there. The way to navigate through the help menu is by pressing the Alt button on your keyboard. There's actually two Alt buttons, one at either end of the space bar. And by pressing the Alt button, the Alt key, you see that we move on down through the help menu, and we can read different items of interest here. The last thing on the menu is deleting records. It tells us how to delete records. And speaking of that, let's say that we wanted to delete something here in the DO data grid. Let's say that we wanted to delete record 10, for example, the one that's showing now. Of course, in order to delete anything in any record grid, it must be the active grid, and DO data is the active grid at this time, and number 10 is the active record. So that record could be deleted if we want to. We go over to the Records Navigator, and this button with the minus sign on it is the Delete Record button. We would press the button, and then it would ask us for a confirmation, delete record or cancel the deletion. Now if we delete that record, you can see that it's gone, and we revert back to record number 9. All right. The same thing would happen in any one of these grids. And I must also tell you that in the general record grid, let's go back to the general record grid. Let's go to record position 4. If I was to delete record position 4, which would be the 4th general record, what will happen is that all records in all the grids, that would be record 4 and any relevant records that are dedicated to that record that are showing now on the screen, would immediately become deleted. So let me show you that. Delete record number 4. Okay, that has been deleted. And we have a confirmation here showing that that record was deleted. We can't, once it's deleted, we can't view record position 4 ever again. There's no way to bring it back. So be careful when you're deleting. You have to do that confirmation in order to delete, or you can cancel. But if you do delete, then that's it. You can't see that anymore or see any of the related records for it. And that leaves us at record position 5 now. What happens if we go up 1 by going to the previous record, you'll see that that's record position 3. Record position 3 still exists. We can go forward to record position 5. What's happening here is that we're jumping over record position 4, which no longer exists in our view. However, it does exist in the data table, the database tables. And it's simply a placeholder there now. There's a special character written in the file that denotes it as a deleted record, but it still does physically exist in the database tables. That's why we jump from position 3 to position 5. Okay? Now, if we don't want to see the help menu anymore, we click function key F1 again. And you see we have some pictures up here in the top. And those will change every now and then based on a timing value. And down in the function key options, we can actually pause the photo. You can see that they just changed. We can pause those photos if we want by pressing function key F8, or turn them back on by pressing F8. Okay. Now, when we're all done writing data into records, when we're done with our session, we should exit the Lakedata program by pressing the Exit Lakedata button, which you see down below the chemical records grid. So let's do that. And you'll see that we have a choice to make here. Save internal backup. Yes, save internal backup, or no, do not save backup this session. If everything went well with your data entry session, you should click to bullet this choice, yes, save internal backup. And if not, then you should choose no, don't save the backup this session. You don't want to click out of the Lakedata program by clicking up in the right-hand corner to close the window. It will close the window, but it won't give you these options for saving the internal data backup. At this point in time, I'm going to choose no, don't save the backup this session. And you'll see that we have another button now saying close window. This would close the Lakedata window and you'd be all done with your session. So that's what I'm going to do at this time, and this would conclude our tutorial video.